They're coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara.
Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. Welcome to an ape-tastic episode of Schreck Talk. Well, we should actually coin this for this episode, Ape Talk. So we're going to be discussing, obviously, Planet of the Apes. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, I've seen all the movies. Read the book. I've actually read the book, too. It's all right.
I was a fan when I was a kid, but I wasn't a huge fan. It's one of these. In the last few years, it's turned into a really big nerd passion for me. That I want everything from Planet of the Apes. So we're just going to go here and just discuss all 8 of the Planet of the Apes movies and give you a little bit of background information as well. So we're going to start out. The book that Mr. Joshua was referring to was written by Pierre Boulle. Was released in 1963 about a bunch of people who leave Earth, go to a planet next to Betelgeuse, I think, in the constellation Betelgeuse.
Yeah, Betelgeuse.
And they discover a planet of apes. The people there can talk. The apes are a lot more advanced than they are in the movie. Pierre Boulle actually did not like the book. It was one of his least favorite books. And I don't know how he could write a whole book and not like it, but apparently he did.
A lot of authors actually say that they just aren't satisfied with the finished product. You know, it's one of those things where you put a lot of maybe it's a labor of love, maybe it's not, but you're writing it and it doesn't end how you envision it. I've had that personally writing a lot of things.
Yeah. So then Hollywood optioned it for a movie. The movie came out, Planet of the Apes, massively popular. Came out in 1968, starring Charlton Heston, where he is on a spaceship. He's an astronaut from Earth and leaves there in the early 70s, I believe, and ends up going into a hypersleep. He wakes up, crash lands on a planet, and hence the Planet of the Apes. This one's like I said, it's historical. Everybody knows about Planet of the Apes. I mean, you can quote lines from the first movie. It is, hugely popular, and it was hugely successful when it came out.
Yeah, the ending is one of those endings that is very impactful and has been parodied and copied in a lot of other mediums. Even though it's very different from the book, I think there's a reason why it stood out at the time. The makeup was good on it, the acting was great on it. It really, even though it's aged kind of poorly, it's aged really well in other ways, I think.
Yeah, and that was the start of the Planet of the Apes franchise, which actually comprised the original movies, comprised 5 movies. Planet of the Apes in 1968, Beneath the Planet of the Apes in 1971, Escape from the Planet of the Apes in 1973, Conquest for the Planet of the Apes in 1974, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes in 1975. Do you have a favorite movie from these?
Well, it's hard to say. Obviously, the first one is the most well known for a reason. I mean,
it's the pinnacle.
Yeah, and it's really hard as with any franchise to top that. But the one I like to watch the most would probably be Conquest. That's probably the one I remember standing out the most to me when I was younger.
Yeah, and that's it kind of takes place. The story. The first 2 movies take place in the future, the year by our calendar 39 something, and then the next 3 movies take place between the 70s and the 90s, 70s and maybe 2000.
I think it's 2000.
Yeah, somewhere around there. The first 2, very very similar tone to them. Charlton Heston is in both of them, a lot more so in the first one. He's kind of like a cameo in the second one.
Yeah, I think that was one of his things, was that he wouldn't have to be the main character, and he wanted only a small part in the film.
Yeah, so in the second one, they actually cast somebody, the character of Brent, who looked a lot like Charlton Heston, simply for the fact to get more of those viewers back.
And one thing that people don't talk a lot about is that sequels weren't really that common a thing at this time. It wasn't very common. You would get a sequel to a film. I mean, except in the horror genre for the most part, and those weren't always direct sequels. They were more just.
Even at that point in time, you didn't get horror sequels either. You hardly got any sequels back in those days.
Yeah, the 40s you did get some with all the Universal films, but that was about it. You didn't get sequels. They weren't a common thing. So I think it really that in itself is something important to mention, like how it kind of started. I wouldn't say it single-handedly started the thing of sequels. Obviously, sequels have been around. People have written sequels to books they've written, but it really, in the film genre, stood. I mean, we ended up with 5 films in the franchise in less than 10 years. And
yeah, in fact, there was a no-year gap in between 2, 3, 4, and 5, and only a 2-year gap in between the first and the second one.
Yeah, so I think the fact about those is that it really shows how popular the films were when they came. The first film, at least, was when it came, and they realized they could get a good, they had a product they could make pretty reliably, get it out quick, and even though you have diminishing returns, they were still making money off of them. So it was one of the first times you got to see that, and I think so. The second one, when it came out, kind of isn't a landmark necessarily, but it's one of those films we got to remember it was not common in its day.
Yeah, and the first one you get, I've already mentioned Charlton Heston, but other good mentions are Cornelius and Zira. Obviously, the second other 2 main characters in the story, and then Dr. Zaius as well. Very, very important, especially in the first one and in the second one.
Well, let's talk about Roddy McDowall, the only actor.
I was just going to say, Roddy McDowall is the only actor. We've mentioned Charlton Heston a bunch of times, but Roddy McDowall is the only actor to play in all 5 of those movies.
That is correct.
As 2 different characters.
2 separate characters. Cornelius.
He played Cornelius in the first 3, and then he played Cornelius' son, Cornelia and Zira's son, Caesar, in the next 2.
Yes, which we'll get into Caesar a little bit more in depth later. But yeah, so in the first film, do we want to spoil the ending? I mean, obviously,
everybody should know the ending.
You should know if we're talking about this. You find out we're obviously on Earth, and this becomes an important part in the franchise because what happens later is determined by this. Like at the end, we see at the end of the second movie, we get basically the destruction.
Yeah, it's the Omega Bomb, and that was a Charlton Heston thing as well. He wanted to be responsible for the destruction of the world, so he could guarantee himself that he would never be in
have to
Planet
be
of the Apes movies.
Yeah, and then in the third one, it's kind of a weird story. We jump back in time, and that's I think that kind of revitalized the franchise in a way because whereas the second film was similar in a lot of ways to the first film, yet different, the third film was completely different. They're back in modern times. There's only 2, and it's kind of a weird political movie almost. It talks about society. It's looking at our society and how we would react to this.
That's one of the great things about Planet of the Apes is, I love my science fiction, but I like my science fiction to be smart as well. One of the reasons I'm such a huge Star Trek fan. Well, if you look at Planet of the Apes, Planet of the Apes is an all-encompassing story that's, not only based on science, but it's also got a lot of political stuff involved in it. It touches on subjects such as religion, race, slavery. It's like across the board. It has a lot to say in the series, not only in the original 5, but in the newer ones as well.
Yeah, with any good series, you science fiction series, you're using a science fiction aspect to tell a story about humanity. That's what good science fiction does. It talks about it shows us who we are through a different means. That's what it's meant to do. That's its ultimate goal, in my opinion. That's what good science fiction does: entertain and tell you, reflect on us as a society.
Yeah, and we also shouldn't forget that the makeup effects for those first 5 movies, now we look at them, they're not that great, but back in the day, that was groundbreaking stuff. Those apes, and they had a lot of issues with sometimes when they're talking, their lips don't actually move like they're supposed to. But I mean, still, for the late 1960s, early 70s, this was groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, and it looks good. I think it looks good, even if it is, everything ages. You look at Terminator 2 and how the CGI is aged compared to other films. Things age. That's what happens. And good effects, even if they've aged, they still hold up. And this one is not the most amazing. It's not 2001, but it looks good, I think.
And they both came out in the same year.
Yeah.
2001 and Planet of the Apes.
And I think that's an impressive... The impressive thing about it is it doesn't look amazing, but those effects, I still believe that those are... it doesn't distract me. It helps put me into the film completely, still to this day.
Yeah, and I've got the entire Blu-ray collection of the first 5 movies. I'm a real big kind of Planet of the Apes nerd. I love watching the movies. As far as they go, the first one, the landmark movie, Charlton Heston, that end scene, which was actually written by the original script was written by Rod Serling. You might know him from the Twilight Zone fame.
Oh, we're not going to talk about Night Gallery?
Nobody cares about Night Gallery. Nobody's even heard of Night Gallery, probably besides us, maybe a couple more people.
I'm sure there's plenty of people who've heard of it.
But Twilight Zone, you watch those, they always have that little twist ending. What the twist? And that's what you get in the first Planet of the Apes movie. The rest of them are kind of straightforward. There is kind of a trickery, kind of twisty ending on Escape for the Planet of the Apes. But there's most of the other movies are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, the endings to me are not what the films are about. While the first ending was great, the other films, they're okay. The endings, I mean, the story for me is what draws me in. Like, in the fourth film, for example, where you get to see what our society has become as a result of Cornelius and Zira coming back. Oddly enough, I think it takes place like 20 years later, 15 years.
Yeah, well, just kind of give you an overview. Okay, so they destroyed the world with the Omega Bomb at the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the second one. Well, in the course of that, Cornelius and Zira knew what was coming. They got into Brent, who's the guy who looks like Charlton Heston in Beneath. They get into his spaceship, retool it, and the bomb actually sends them back in time to the 1970s, to 1971, I believe. Apes haven't taken over yet. Charlton Heston's flight, I believe, is just left on its mission. And they go back in time, and everybody's kind of, it really mimics the book, actually, where everybody kind of goes back. Society is awed by these talking people, these talking apes. But then they realize eventually that if they let the apes have a child, they're going to eventually cause in a drunken moment, Zira talks about what the future was like and what had happened to humans, and that if they let Zira and Cornelius have a kid, that's what's going to eventually happen to the world.
I like how you had it in the minor plot point that they got her drunk for her to reveal it. But, I mean, it is kind of an important thing that happens once they realize the danger that they actually pose to human society. Now it's time we have to study them. We have to keep them under lock and key. We have to watch them and stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense that it would they would be keeping onto it. But it's such a minor plot point, but it's so important into the whole franchise.
And then they basically hide their kid away. He gets born and gets raised with a circus and ends up becoming Caesar. And it takes place in the future.
The wonderful Ricardo Montalban. How are we not talking about Khan?
He was great. He had a very small part in both the third one and the fourth one. The end of the third one, the beginning of the fourth one. But he was still really good. And then Caesar, we're in a new world now where dogs and cats have died out. Apes are now pets for humans, and they kind of use them as slaves. Like in our couple episodes ago where we were talking about robots using them as slaves. Same exact thing here. And Caesar eventually leads an uprising.
Yeah, it's something we can't ignore. We're going to have to mention it later, but something that we're seeing now in the modern the modern remakes. That's part of the reason I liked it so much as a kid. Is it was kind of this. It took place in I think 1984 in the story's timeline.
And I think it was actually maybe 1997 or something. 1990. It was in the 90s. It wasn't in the 80s. Yeah,
I thought it took place in the 80s. Whatever. It's a minor point. And it took place kind of in the future from when it was made, obviously. And it was weird that I liked how they created this kind of a larger universe. This is what Earth was like at this point. It had changed. It had been a little different. And then you had this kind of militaristic society in a way that oversaw the exchange and training of the apes and stuff like that. I really liked it. I don't know. It's one of those films that it's not really that great, but it stands out for me. And I think even among the fans, it's pretty popular. I don't know, actually.
Yeah, and then you go from that good one though to the most. We're not even going to talk about it too much. But Battle for the Planet of the Apes is horrid. It's terrible. All these other movies I've seen at least 4 or 5 times minimum, even for the bad ones. But for Battle, I've seen it, I believe, once, maybe twice. I think I gave it a second chance, but it's just terrible. The budget was cut. They didn't know what they were doing. This was the 5th movie in 6 years. It was not very good at all.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you had milked the cow dry. Why, there was no point anymore. You're getting no, and the returns on the film saw that. It killed the franchise for sure. I mean, but at this point it was oversaturation. You can't help but have the franchise fatigue.
It was like bringing out the Saw movies every year. you're going to get that franchise fatigue.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. The only film that we're not seeing that in is Fast and the Furious. That's the only time that's ever happened. So that one's actually going up. But I mean, that's what happens when you make that many films back to back so quickly. People lose interest in it. You can't keep rehashing the same thing. You'll see it in everything. Even Marvel films are seeing diminishing returns now, and that's what happened with it. And the sad part is they cut the budget. Even if they had wanted to make a good product, they would have had a hard time, even if it was there.
Yeah, and that kind of put an end to, like you said, it killed the franchise. It didn't really kill it because the following year in, I believe, 74, 74, they came out with Planet of the Apes, the TV show.
Okay, your year, you just totally gave wrong years for everything.
Okay, well, let me go back. Let me give you my years. 68 for the original, 70 for Beneath, 71 for Escape from the Planet of the Apes, 72 for Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, 73 for Battle of the Planet of the Apes. Then that killed it. As far as movies went, in 74 there was a TV show. I actually own it. I bought it. It's missing. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I don't know where the heck it's at.
If you haven't and you're listening to this, please bring it back to us.
Please bring it back to...
we miss it.
Send it to us in care of Schreck Talk. And then in 75 they came out with a cartoon show called Return to the Planet of the Apes, which only lasted a season as well.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever even seen anything about that before. I think I've seen maybe a little clip of it or something on YouTube.
Yeah, so then it got... The franchise kind of died out after the cartoon show. You really wouldn't hear anything about it until about the 90s. They decided that they wanted to bring it back, but it became stuck in development hell with Oliver Stone, Arnold Schwarzenegger attached to it, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, this is starting of the era of remakes when we're going to start seeing.
Right in the in the early 90s, they're like, well, we want to revitalize the franchise.
It's a good product. We can make something of it. Let's get it out there. And I think we're going to have fun discussing this in a minute. Considering our remakes episode and how we discussed how we hate remakes, and I think this will be interesting to talk about in a second.
Well, so then it took about 10 years or so for them to actually come out with the movie, and in 2001 they came out with the Planet of the Apes remake. It's kind of a remake, not really, but it is.
Reimagining, as would become common with most franchises that they do remake nowadays. It's more commonly a reimagining, like, I think I can do better.
Yeah, so, and this is universally hated by a lot of the Planet of the Apes fans. I don't really hate it that much, to be honest with you. I mean, it's not very good. It's one of the weaker entries of the 8 movies. Definitely better than Battle, though.
Anything's better than Battle.
Starring Marky Mark and Helena Bonham Carter, which Tim Burton puts in every frickin' thing. Estella Warren's in that. You get Michael Clark Duncan, Tim Roth.
We get a cameo by Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston is Dr. Zaius. He actually comes in there. He said he would never do another Planet of the Apes movie. He killed himself off in the movie. There's the only way he would return. And then 30 years later, he comes back into Planet of the Apes in the remake. What are your thoughts on the remake?
I remember liking it. I haven't watched it. I'll be honest, I haven't watched it in about 8-10 years. But I remember liking it. I remember thinking it was good, but having problems with the this was before my love with Mark Wahlberg started. Maybe I should rewatch it knowing now how I feel about him. But it's one of those films that it was good for one watch. I enjoyed it. I think I tried watching it a second time, and I was like, nah, whatever. It wasn't that great.
Yeah, I liked it. It took a different, interesting take on it. And I actually... when the movie came out, I read the original book and the new movie book simultaneously. So there was a lot fewer chapters in the remake book, but I would read like one chapter there, 2 or 3 in the Planet of the Apes books. And the ending, which is really hated by fans, that's like the one thing that they point to is the really odd and confusing ending for the remake. Is very similar actually to the book, more so than the original movie.
Yeah, that's actually one of the points I was going to say. The one thing I like, the main difference I would say in this film compared to the originals is you see a much more ape-like nature out of the apes than you saw in the originals. They're very human-like.
Yeah, they're very civilized.
They're very civilized. They act and talk like humans. They walk like humans. There's very little ape mannerism to them. And Tim Burton brought this aspect back into them. This they're still apes at heart, even though they have this society, this larger society, and are more civilized. And I think that was the one thing that I thought was really well done in the film, is adding that element back into it. You got to see more of how that ape nature it stayed with them. They never lost that wild part like we did when we evolved.
And then after that movie, it was so kind of hated by the critics that it took another 10 years for them to come out with the 2 movies that we've got out now, the start of a new franchise that started with Rise of the Planet of the Apes and then led to 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which did just come out on Blu-ray or DVD. So pick your medium, choose your medium, and go out and get it right now.
No, Blu-ray. Get it on Blu-ray.
Well, they don't have a Blu-ray player. They can't go out and get
Go out and buy a Blu-ray player. This
Okay.
this is the
Well, I like the 3D version, so go buy the 3D Blu-ray player and
exactly,
3D TV
and
and
get it the best way possible. I
Yeah,
mean,
of
we
course.
love movies. This is the best way to watch it. I agree.
Absolutely.
The 3D is actually pretty good on the new one. But let's talk about Rise for a moment.
With Rise, which should have been called Dawn.
Yeah.
And then Dawn should have been called Rise.
Yeah, but you can't have that. They didn't know the property was going to be so well received. I don't know why James Franco. Everyone loves James Franco, and John Lithgow gave a really good performance in the film.
Yes, he did.
But I know you're a huge fan of this, and I'm not on the same page.
I really like Rise. I like the 2 new. No, don't get me wrong. I love the original series, but I also love these 2 new entries that have come in. Andy Serkis does a fabulous job as Caesar, who they got the name obviously from the Roddy McDowall Caesar, who started the revolution. And these 2 movies actually are very similar to, they're kind of a retelling of the conquest and the battle for the Planet of the Apes. And they do, I think, at least for the battle version in Dawn, they do a far superior version to it in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes than they did with Battle for sure.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, they're not exactly the same storylines, nowhere near, but they do mimic the 2 society. The first one is the Rise. That's why it's called, Rise was a good name. It fit when the movie was made.
They didn't know that they were going to do a sequel.
They didn't know the film was going to be so well received, but it was the start of their society, how it founded. It was humans, and then we saw Caesar, first one. They kind of, again, it was a reimagining on how it started. But it's one of those things where they completely ignored the previous films. Like, oh, there was no planet. It's nothing like, Going to the Future. It's like, we're going to start here in our modern timeline and take it. And it did a lot of things well. A lot of people loved it. I didn't think it was that horrible. I didn't think it was that amazing. It was a one-watcher for me. It was good, but I didn't love it.
For both movies?
I don't know. The new one with Dawn, I thought it was great. I enjoyed my first watch much more. I definitely would give it another watch. How was your second watch on Dawn? Before I want to go back to Rise. But
I actually liked Dawn better the second watch than I did the first watch. So it's got some rewatchability to it for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty fun. I liked the story that they created. Again, the storyline, large poor population is decreased massively. We're barely surviving at this point, and this is only 12 years after. I think it's like 10 years.
10 years after Rise of the Planet of the Apes,
and almost all of the population has been wiped out by
the simian flu that
was resulted because of what happens in Rise.
Yes,
and I enjoyed I didn't Rise for me didn't feel that great. I didn't like it that much, but I actually liked Dawn watching it. I just watched it last night. And I thought Gary Oldman obviously was great in it. And I think it does a good job of it's one of those weird films that's trying to be it's a summer movie. I worked at the theater when it came out, and it's trying to be a thinking man's movie as well, though.
Yeah, it's like we said about the original Planet of the Apes, all the different things, the politics, the race, the slavery, all of that stuff that they brought in the original ones, they brought into these ones too, but they made them big budget action movies as well with a high level of CGI.
With Dawn, the story isn't as important as the characters. It's definitely a character study. It has to show. It's kind of sad that the movie is, it's all really based around Caesar gaining a little understanding of apes and humans, of learning that in reality, we're all three-dimensional. We're very similar, but we may have differences, but we're very similar species. Obviously, we're so closely related, and I think that's one of the things that stood out. It was kind of a simple story in a larger way that's not so simple. Like, it's weird because the whole point of the story is, okay, this is another interaction of humans and apes, just like it's not the start of it, but it's an interaction with them that's important to the timeline that they're creating of this Planet of the Apes, and the whole point of it, though, is really just gaining understanding that what's going to happen is inevitable. One of the two species is going to have to become more dominate, and one will not. And it's no matter what you do to try and avoid it, because of the nature of how our species is, how we are, it's going to happen. One will have to dominate the other.
And you already know it's going to be the apes.
We know it's going to be the apes.
The story is about the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, but the humans don't know this, and the apes don't know this in the movie.
Yes, in the movies they don't know this. And one of the things that they did add into the newer movies is a lot more heart and emotion. You don't really get those in the earlier flicks. The first 5, even in the remake, you don't get a whole lot of that. But you do get a lot in these last 2 movies.
When you mention that, let's first off look at the time when the original came out. Sci-fi films were not at the level that now. Sci-fi films are very well respected as a genre. You can say a lot. You can get to people and make a meaningful film. But in that same, as you mentioned, same year as 2001, that was the first time a film that was a science fiction film came out when taken seriously by people. And Planet of the Apes wasn't. It made a ton of money, but it still wasn't at the time. Even the social and political things it was saying weren't really taken seriously. Even though they're there in the film, they see it as more of a popcorn film, like a fun film to have. And I think that's one of the weird things about it, though, is that now you get these films that people read a lot into, and you can make these great science fiction films and thinking man's films, as I call them, and make them huge, entertaining blockbusters at the same time. But at that time, that wasn't something that people considered. So then most people didn't even see what Planet of the Apes had to say at the time. They just saw this entertaining movie, with these great lines in it and these great acts.
I disagree, because I think it's so popular because of that first movie and the thoughts and the ideas that it put forth in there. I think people are smart enough, especially back in that day. I think people aren't as smart now, honestly, as people were back then. But I think back then they realized what the movie was about. That's why it's been so well received and so well loved for the last 40 years.
Yeah, but maybe I didn't say it that right then. When it was made, there was a different kind of filmmaking at the time, so it didn't take things as it presented them in a different way than you do nowadays, in a much more natural way than you got in the films back in that day. There you go. That's a better way of what I'm trying to say. Sci-fi at the time. So I think the new films definitely offer a much more human aspect, oddly enough, considering the movie's about apes. And we can both agree, like in Dawn, the story of the humans was kind of insignificant compared to the story of the apes.
Yeah, the apes were the focus of the movie. They were the actual really interesting and compelling part of the movie. In Rise, it was more the humans, but Dawn, it's like there was an even kind of amount, but the apes story was definitely more interesting, more compelling. And I'm thinking, in the next movie that's supposed to be coming out in 2016, it's going to be almost entirely about the ape society, I think.
We mentioned it kind of similar to what happens in the Robot series. The first one was very humans with some few apes. This one was, more equal balanced humans to apes, and the next one should be apes more balanced.
Mostly.
Yeah, with a few humans.
So I'm going to put you on the spot now here. And we haven't planned this, so you don't know what I'm going to ask you. But I want you to name me, in the entire series, all 8 movies, I want you to name me your favorite ape and your favorite human characters.
My favorite ape and my human characters. Well, are you ready? Because I want to think about it for a second. So I have one in my mind. I want to think about it for a second because we had... All right, okay, for example, is Caesar a separate character in Conquest?
They're 2 separate characters.
Those are 2 separate characters.
Yeah, they're alternate realities, 2 separate characters.
Okay, then I have my favorite character already. My favorite ape, at least, for sure. Which I guess I'll go. And then you can go your ape, so I'll have time to think about my human for a second. And that would be Zira. Zira, hands down, was my favorite.
Played by Kim Hunter.
The female ape from the first 3 films. I think it was the same actress in all 3 films.
Yes, it was.
I'm glad to hear that. And I really liked her character because she's the one who makes the connection with the humans and sees that there's the intelligence there. She's the one who really understands human being. She's got that scientist at heart. She's the reason the story progresses the way it does is because of what happens with her. So I think she is one of the most important characters in the series. One, because of what happens with giving birth to her giving birth to Caesar, and obviously Cornelius played a big role in that. But for me, it was her hands down.
And she's like the most human of the apes in all of the movies, I think. You strip off that makeup and you see her as just a regular person.
She's a woman.
Yeah.
She
Whereas some of the
she's
other characters you
compassionate.
don't. But she is very much just a regular human female.
Yeah, she's compassionate.
Makeup on.
She feels for, just like humans, a good person feels for other life forms that are considered beneath them. She feels compassion for other life. She's a scientist. She wants to help. She's all about improving her own life for everybody. She's just a good all-around person.
So I'll go with my favorite ape now. And there really is 3 that I like. even though the remake wasn't very good, I really liked Thade, played by Tim Roth. I think he did a fabulous job, and the makeup effects in that movie are amazing. So yeah, he's good. I also like the Caesar from the new movies, played by Andy Serkis or Circus, whatever it is. He does a really good job. But my hands down, my favorite ape has to be Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius. Dr. Zaius. I love that character. He's such a complex and interesting character. The politics and the religious stuff and the science argument coming in from him, he pushes the story in the first two movies. Without him, there really is no story in those first two movies, and I think he does a fabulous job. The guy, the orangutan in the new movies, Maurice, was actually named by the actor, and I don't remember his name, who played Dr. Zaius in the first movie, but I've got to go easily with Dr. Zaius as my favorite character.
Okay, well,
my favorite ape.
Your favorite ape. My favorite human character, which I had a hard time deciding. He was not a very important one, but he's very important. He's a very small character, and that's Khan, Ricardo Montalban. I don't remember his character's name in the movies, but he was the circus entertainer who was the reason at the end of the third film you see them leave their kid Caesar with him as they go and fake their dad, get killed, basically to ensure that their baby will survive, which was a great ending actually to that film. And then you see him again in the start of Conquest, who's raised Caesar and he loves him almost like he's his own child. He feels very close and personal with him, and he ends up dying in a way kind of protecting him, if I recall right. I haven't watched that movie in about 5-6 years, so I'm not positive. But he really stood out to me because he was a human character who bonded really closely with the apes, and that to me was something that made him special. He stood out.
Yeah, and I don't think, honestly, in the series, in all 8 movies, that there's really a human character that stands head and shoulders above the rest, in my opinion.
No, there's no great, because it's a story. That's what's great about it. It's about the apes. Yeah.
But if I had to pick one, I've got to go with Charlton Heston, Taylor from the first one. I mean, Charlton Heston, the man, the myth, the legend. In the first movie, he is the main character and makes that movie so enjoyable. So I got to go with him on that one. But let's. I don't know if you have an order. I'm just going to real quick order the movies. The 8th one, the worst one by far, Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
8, I've got to agree with you. Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Horrible. Just awful.
Horrible, terrible. Number 7, I would actually put Beneath the Planet of the Apes. A lot of fans love this movie. I don't really care. The whole mutant thing that's in there is very uninteresting. And the first half of the movie just seems like a rehash of the first one.
If I was going to pick my my number is 7, my second worst one, we'll just go 7. I think that's the number. I would probably pick Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, 2001, just because, like I said, it's not watchable. There's some kind of hokey aspects to it, and it doesn't stand up.
Yeah, that would actually be my number 6. I like it better than Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and I like it better than Battle for the Planet of the Apes. I think it's definitely a better movie, but I still don't think it's that good. Number 5.
Well, my number, you got
to do your number 6.
My number 6 would be Rise. I know that one.
No,
we're going to be very disagreeing on this one, but. I just didn't. I couldn't really. I barely enjoyed it like the first time. I had a hard time sitting through it. The ending was great, good characters, good acting, good production. Just it didn't resonate with me though. There you go.
All right. Well, my number 5 is going to be Escape from the Planet of the Apes, the one where Cornelius and Zira go back in time to the 1970s. There really isn't. It's not really a Planet of the Apes at this time. It's just 2 apes. But it's definitely better than the other ones I mentioned so far. Just it's not as good as any of the other ones.
Yeah, the reason I would put that one at the same level as yours, number 5, is because it's well done. It's great. It's middle of the road though. It has some unique things in it. It's different, but as far as watchability, it just doesn't. To me, it doesn't really stand out that great.
All right, so my number 4 will be Conquest for the Planet of the Apes. This is the one where the original version of Rise, where we see the apes and Caesar, played by Roddy McDowall, take over.
My number 4 would probably be Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I like this movie obviously a lot more than you. I think at this point we're getting into the fact where we're talking about good movies. We're halfway through them. We like most all of them. Obviously we don't like Battle very much, but we like them. I enjoyed it. You had issues with it. I thought it was fun, and the ending is pretty awesome.
All right, my number 3. Now, these ones, number 3 and number 2, have changed spots, but I'm going to go with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is my number 3. A thinking man's movie, like you said, action, adventure, lots of emotion. I haven't watched it enough to see if it'll go any higher, though.
Yeah, my number 3, oddly enough, you were worried I wasn't going to like it, and I enjoyed it. It's obviously pretty high, would be Dawn. I mean, how can you argue with an ape on a horse with 2 machine guns? I mean, fighting a tank. It doesn't get much better than that, and it's pretty smartly made.
All right, so my number 2 then would be Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I love this movie. It's got a lot of heart and emotion. Getting to see how the apes, start to advance and everything like that. James Franco's good in it. I know you don't like it, but I love it.
My number 2, this was hard. I was fighting for it over the entire time we were going through the list. Is going to be the original Planet of the Apes. You can't argue with it. It's so amazing. It's fantastic. It's Heston, the lines, everything. Obviously, we know it now.
I can't argue with it, but I can't argue with it being number 2 on your list. It's number 1 on my list. It's the one that started it all. Dr. Zaius, Charlton Heston, Cornelius Zira, the great story, the great ending. You cannot deny the importance of this movie and how amazing it is, even 45 years later.
Yeah, and obviously my number 1 would be The Conquest, and for me, it's nowhere near as good a movie. I'm not going to argue it's a better movie than the original, but I love it. It's the movie I watched the most when I was younger. I mean, this is a franchise we grew up with, especially the first 5, and we watched them pretty regularly, if I recall. And I can't pick any other one because none of them stood out as much to me. I know it's not as good, but it's my movie. It's my personal one. And I mean, Skinless used one of the great quotes from it, and I just love that movie.
Alrighty, so that's going to be our thoughts on the Planet of the Apes saga. Still looking forward to another movie coming out in 2016. If we're still doing these podcasts then we're obviously going to review that. I hope we will. But we're going to go to Mr. Joshua's tea time. I'm going to sit here and eat a barrel of bananas while he does that. And just remember, ape shall not kill ape.
Tea time! Tea time!
Yip hard. I think that's a good place to start for us, because my tea time this week, well, before we get into it, it's actually not tea time this week. It is beer time, which happens once in a great while.
It's happened twice in the last 4 episodes.
Yeah, so I mean, it happens, and I'm okay with that. Tonight's actually kind of an unusual one. It's called Tusker. It's the only African beer I've ever seen, and I had to buy it. It's not that amazing. It's not that great. Would you like to try it? Would you like to sample it real quick?
I'll sample it real quick.
It's kind of a straight, one of those middle-of-the-road flavor beers. It doesn't have much body.
It's really, really bland.
Yeah, it's kind of bland. It's not horrible. It's from Kenya. Not worth what I paid for it, for sure. But to get on to my topic tonight, we're going to be talking about my favorite sport. I may get some disagreement from my brother about this, but it actually surpasses my love of hockey. Even though it's not nearly as exciting to watch, I love the sport of curling. It comes from Scotland. It's most common in the Great White North in Canada. That's where it's most commonly played.
Yeah, sure, you betcha.
Yeah, don't you know? They have more registered players. I believe of the 1.1 million registered curlers in the world, there's about 1 million of them from Canada. So it's obviously kind of their sport, even though it originates in Scotland, and my favorite curler comes from Scotland. But I want to talk a little bit about it. It's kind of a different sport. Before I say it, I know this is my topic. What are your thoughts on curling? You enjoy it. You seem to enjoy watching it with me.
I enjoy curling. I don't think it's a great sport. It's interesting to watch. It's a very slow sport. You kind of have to, know most of the strategies and what they're trying to do. It's a lot like shuffleboard on ice.
I think I prefer to call it chess on ice, even though the game.
Not chess on ice. It's shuffleboard.
That's the nickname of the game, even though the game is similar to shuffleboard. It's a very strategy-based game.
They call it chess on ice because they want to make it sound better than it actually is. It's shuffleboard.
Okay, well, you're not going to say anything else now after that.
I do like curling, though. I do like curling. I just don't think it's chess on ice.
You just earned the cone of silence for the rest of my tea time. But it started in the mid 1500s, I think, is the first record of it we have. And as I said, it started in Scotland, and it was, it's a game based. If you don't know what the game is, it's played on ice, pebbled ice actually, which is where they do an unusual thing to it, where they drop water onto the surface of a smooth ice to make it more textured, so it's easy to grip and walk on, and it's not actually very slippery. And you have these stones that are made of two types of granite, one rather uncommon. And you basically, it is kind of a similar game of shuffleboard. You have a ring where you throw the rocks, and you basically try and get as close to the middle of your goal. It's kind of like a target. It looks like a target on a dartboard or something. And the whole point is to get your rocks into the rings and get as close to the button, which is the middle of the rings, as possible, and knock out the other players, make sure that they don't have rings close to it. It involves a lot of strategy while also using the physical aspect of throwing the rocks and trying to get them to curl and land in the right spots, and your teammates using sweep brooms to sweep the ice to lower the resistance or not sweeping, to try and help get the rock where you want it to go.
Either speed it up or slow it down. If you don't sweep, you slow it down, or it slows down naturally. If you do sweep, it goes faster on smoother ice.
Yeah, I guess I'll remove your cone of silence. But it's a very sportsman type game. It's very much about camaraderie. It's very strategy based. It is a slow game. It's one of those kind of games where I imagine going to it is like going to a baseball game. You're very slow. You talk about it. I mean, drinks are common after the games. It's it's like a natural, like one of the basic rules of playing a curling match is you always buy the losing team a round of beers, because it's about companionship. It's about honor. It's about class. It's a gentleman's game in a way. Not to sound sexist, but it's a game that's meant to be very classy. When you make a mistake, you call it on yourself. It's all about sportsmanship, and that's one of the aspects I really like about the game. But it's played with 4 players on each team, and it's just very entertaining. I don't know. I got into it. It was in the 1924 Olympics. It made its first appearance. Even though it didn't become a sport in the Olympics until I think 98 in Nagano, I think was 98. Torino, Nagano, I think it was Nagano. But I got into it in 2002 for the first time was when I saw it, and then I think we really got into it in Vancouver.
Yeah, and that's where I started watching it. MSNBC, I think it was, or CNBC had a whole mess of games on, or matches, and just watching those, I was just kind of curious when I first started.
It's got one of those sports that people are naturally like, what is this? Because it's a little different.
Yeah, and I think after about 8 hours of sitting there watching it, I was hooked. From the first watch, it was really interesting and entertaining, and it just all started pretty innocently. You just watch it, you get into it, you start to figure out and learn the strategies.
Yeah, and it's one of those games you're like, oh, this is what I would do. This is how I would handle it. And it's very much it's one of those games you talk about while you're watching it. You don't just sit there and watch it. It's not fast-paced at all. You wait for each person to throw the rock, and then you're like, how's it going to go? It's kind of similar to watching baseball. Like, as I said, it's slow-moving. It's not a fast game, but it's fun. And, I mean, if you get a chance, I recommend going online and watching, just looking up maybe some of the crazy shots to start off with. That's a good way to get into it. But it might not be for you. It might not be something you find interesting. But I think it's a very entertaining game. It involves a lot of skill. It's very entertaining, I think. Some people find it a little slow. But my pick of the week is just go out and watch something like, a match online. Not even a full match, just a couple of cool shots. And if you think that's interesting, then watch a little game and see, how the strategies work. And I don't think most people are going to be into it. There's a reason. But every year the popularity goes up. Every Olympics it gets more. I mean, it was even getting on regular NBC matches were being played. So it's definitely gaining its popularity. And at some point, hopefully, we'll get to see it more. The downside is the rocks. The rocks are so hard to come by. So you need the ice to go on. So it's not going to be very popular, very widespread. But it's a sport. It's a sport of kings in a way, I think. I just coined that. It's not
All
true.
right, so that's your pick of the week. Go watch a curling match.
Go watch curling match. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really have much more to say besides curling is awesome. If you don't know what it is, you need to check it out. It takes a very little while to learn, but then one of those things that it's easy to learn, but impossible to master. So there you go. So let's go ahead and hear what you got this week on your swamp.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Alrighty, so here's going to be another episode, another installment, I guess you could say, of Schreck Swamp. And I'm actually going to be talking about a band I'm really into. They put out 4 albums starting since 2006. They're called Blackstone Cherry. Actually got their name from a cigar that they smoked. And it's a bunch of guys from Kentucky.
Tobacco is bad.
It's a bunch of guys from Kentucky who make like a kind of southern feel hard rock, like AC/DC meets Lynyrd Skynyrd, only with not as many cool guitar solos.
I don't think that's a good way. I mean, they have more style than AC/DC. AC/DC keeps playing the same song over and over.
Yeah, but AC/DC's hard rock and Lynyrd Skynyrd's southern rock. You put those two together, you get Blackstone Cherry.
It's like, to me, it's like more like a modern Molly Hatchet.
Okay, there you go. Just with not as good guitar solos.
There you go.
I think that they just don't get the credit that they deserve. And they're a really good band that you should probably go check out. Like I said, their first album came out in 2006. It was self-titled, called Blackstone Cherry.
Was it really that long ago?
Yeah, it was 8 years ago now.
I can't believe it. Because we got it shortly after it came out.
Yeah, it was brand new when I got it. I just looked at it. I'm like, this looks kind of cool. Picked it up, took it home, like fell in love with it.
Yeah, I think it was like 2006 or 2007 we got it.
Yeah, and they, the first album is pretty much just straight across the board hard rock. There really isn't any downer tracks or slow tracks. There really isn't any tracks that change too much of the bass sound of the band. It's just straight hard rock in your face. And then I was really looking forward to the second album. That was called Folklore and Superstition. It came out 2 years later in 2008. I still remember getting it in the CD and then waiting at the Teriyaki Chicken Bowl, listening to the album, rocking out.
Chicken Bowl.
This one, though, they changed it up a little bit. They added some slower tracks in there. There's like 3 or 4 really slower tracks.
And I'll go ahead and say this is the album where I didn't love the first time I own it. It never clicked for me. It was one of those albums that was good, but it kind of was middle of the water. So at this point, I'm going to lose all things to say about the band.
Okay, well, and I really liked Folklore and Superstition. I thought the band moved forward. The first album is still my favorite of them, but the band moved forward, tried something different. They still had that hard rock element in them, but they did some little bit different things here and there, some different sounds, and then they changed it a little bit more on the third album called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, which came out 3 years later in 2011. Right from the first track, you know what kind of album you're in for. The first track's called White Trash Millionaire. I think this is a great track. If you want to, go out and check it up. Check out the video on YouTube. It's a really good thing, but there's also a song on this one called Stay. And if you've already heard this song, you may not have heard of the band, but a lot of you people out there have already heard this song. It was covered by a country band called Florida Georgia Line, and the cover is just terrible. I absolutely hate that twangy version of this song. But if you listen to the original version, it's got so much heart and emotion. It's not even the best song on the album. But they were trying some different stuff here. They've got like kind of a Caribbean feel song. They've got a few more slower tracks and a little bit more interesting sounds, but they're still got that hard rock edge to it. A song called Blame It on the Boom Boom, which you can only guess what that's about. But it's a really good album, and I know you were out of it this point too.
Yeah, I never really gave the band another chance. I've heard some of the songs, and to be honest, it sounds like the same band. I know they're a little different. I've heard a couple songs that are not nearly as rocking as the stuff on the first one, but maybe it's something about the guy's voice that bugs me. I don't know.
Oh, I love his voice. That's one of the best things I love about this band. This band is that he's got such a like strong Southern kind of voice, and it comes across and just like cuts across the music.
He's always like, oh,
whatever. He's got a great voice. I've talked to Chorizo about this. She loves his voice. She thinks he's got a great voice as well. That's one of the things that really stands out about the band. They're not really great musicians. Like I said, they're missing their guitar solos. I mean, if you threw Zakk Wylde in there as just an occasional solo, the band would be so much better. But as it stands, they're still really good. They're not great musicians, but they know how to write great music. The singer's voice is just amazing. Like I said, it cuts through all the music. And then... so kind of moving on here, then it was another 3 years before they released their fourth album, which actually came out this year, called Magic Mountain. You can only possibly imagine what that's about. There is the first single from the album is called Me and Mary Jane. So you kind of get an idea. There's a song on there called Peace Pipe, what they were doing and what they were thinking about when they wrote this album.
I wonder if this was always part of because I never really saw this aspect of them in any of their songs I heard. Did you notice anything about this part of their personality in the other songs?
Not really.
I mean, when did they become the Cottonmouth Kings?
Yeah, it really didn't start until this album. I mean, everything else was pretty much straightforward. They're great storytellers. A lot of their songs are about storytelling, like making moonshine up in the mountains, and just all kinds of stuff. I mean, that's what their writing style is kind of like. But then in this album, they kind of changed things up, and definitely some different sounds on the album. There's a song called Hollywood in Kentucky that's like a kind of a redneck version of what, all the lyrics are about what Hollywood would be like if it was actually in Kentucky. And then obviously the Mary Jane references are quite prevalent on this album. The cover is like them standing in front of a mountain, and it's all like kaleidoscope kind of colors, like a rainbow in front of them. Yeah.
So they've definitely gone a little native. They've gone a little kooky in this last one.
No, not really. I mean, the music's still great. It's kind of late. It's like Tom Petty. It's Last Dance with Mary Jane. It's littered with some
references to other blatant references to other things.
Yes, they're not hiding it anymore. The drug culture isn't hiding itself anymore, and it obviously isn't on this album. But there's 4 great albums there. First one just straight ahead rock and roll, but you can see the progression of the band from that first album, which is my favorite, until the new album. A lot of different styles, but they still keep that hard rock southern edge to them. Do you have any final thoughts on Blackstone Cherry?
Maybe it's one of those things like Machine Head where I should really give the band another chance, but I'm too stubborn to. Perhaps someday. Not for me though. It's not my cup of tea. Ha.
Alrighty. So just 4 tracks to check out. This really doesn't encompass the entire sound of the band, but they're just my favorite tracks. I picked one from each album. From the first album, Blackstone Cherry, I'm going to go with Crosstown Woman, probably my favorite song from that album.
I can actually pick a song from this album, and I'm going to go with Rain Wizard. I think it's the first song. Isn't that what it's
called? Rain Wizard, yes.
Yeah, Rain Wizard.
Yeah, that's the very first song on the album. That's a good song as well. I actually considered picking that one instead of Crosstown Woman.
I'm actually pretty proud that I was like, I could actually give you a song off the first album.
The second one, this one was a little bit harder. There's so many great tracks on the album, but I'm going to go with Long Sleeves. Check out that one. And then on the third album, Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, a song I just love. I think it's an amazing song, is Such a Shame, and there's a great story in this one, a great thing that they have to say. And then on the fourth album, Magic Mountain, I already mentioned it. It's going to be Hollywood in Kentucky. It's a really fun song, kind of in the vein of maybe a Weird Al Yankovic, something like that. So Blackstone Cherry, go check them out.
I didn't know that. I might have to hear that song now that you mentioned that. Sorry to cut you off right as you're finishing up, but I didn't know when you say Weird. You said Weird Al, and I was like, what?
Well, it's like a comedy song. It's
I love
version.
comedy.
You'll have to check it out. So from here, we're going to move on to the final countdown, where we discuss our top 5 superheroes.
It's the final countdown.
Thank you, DJ. So we're gonna be obviously we're talking about our superheroes this week. I had a lot of fun actually picking this list. I thought it was gonna be kind of a bland list to pick at first, but the more I thought about it and looked around at my collections of things, I really enjoyed the list. So I'm really excited to get in it. Before we get into it, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, you're gonna see the total difference in between the comic books that you like and the comic books that I like, specifically in the comic book producers. I think the majority of yours are from one comic book publisher, and the majority of mine are from one comic book publisher.
Actually, you're quite wrong on that. I only have 2 that are from the comic book publisher, and I have a few characters that aren't even really comic book characters to start off with. So let me, since this is my list, I'm really proud of my list here. I want to hear your number 5 first.
Okay, my number 5 is going to be the actual only female character on my list is going to be Wonder Woman. I thought about this list as sort of a straightforward list, so I went with all comic book characters. But Wonder Woman, she is the ultimate female superhero. She's got the brains, she's got the brawn. She's not too bad looking either. Princess Diana, Amazonian princess, Wonder Woman.
That's a good pick. I like Wonder Woman, actually, and her invisible plane. I'm going to go with, for my number 5, is actually from the hero from the comic book Hack Slash. Her name is Cassie Hack. She's a normal human, but she goes around hunting slashers, as they're called in the comic book, which are basically reanimated killers that sometimes have special powers. And her and her buddy go around and just beat him up and kill him. It's pretty entertaining stuff, and it's kind of in the vein of like Buffy or something. The wittiness of the writing.
All right, so my number 4 is going to be Batman. You probably heard me in previous episodes talk about, Batman in a negative sense. I do like Batman. I don't think he's as good as my number 1 character, and I think he gets a little bit more popularity than he deserves, but I do like him. So Batman's my number 4.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Batman, I think. My number 4 is actually become a little more mainstream at this point because of her appearance recently in X-Men Days of Future Past, even though that's not exactly how I envision the character, and that's Blink, Clarice Ferguson Clara Ferguson. I think it's Clarice from X-Men. It's my only X-Men in there, which was my comic. She's actually I was introduced to her through the Age of Apocalypse series, and where they brought her character back because she was only a minor character that had appeared in like one episode. I know I'm giving you a lot of story for a character you've never heard of, but Blink, my number 4.
All right. My number 3 is actually going to be one that I've gotten into only recently in the last few years, and that's going to be the Green Lantern. Mostly Hal Jordan as the Green Lantern. There are other ones, Guy Gardner, John Stewart, but I think the one for me is going to be Hal Jordan. The Jeff Johns stuff that everybody kind of doesn't like from when he took over writing for the Green Lantern comics, I freaking love it, and that really got me into the character.
I am starting to sense a theme here among yours. My number 3 is actually the first superhero to come out of New Jersey, and that would be the Toxic Avenger from the 1985, I believe, film from Troma, the Toxic Avenger. He's become kind of their mascot, and I just love Toxie. He's such a great character. He's so much fun. I got an action figure of him. I know he's made his appearance in other medium in cartoons, video games. So I imagine he's made it into comics as well. And I love the Toxic Avenger.
Yeah. So then we're gonna go to my number 2, and you are gonna get a theme here, with the exception of this one, which, if you listened to our episode 2 episodes ago, I believe the remakes one, you actually heard me talk about the Green Hornet. I mean, just go back and listen to that episode. You'll see why I love the Green Hornet. You'll hear the passion in my voice when I talk about the Green Hornet. My first superhero, the one that has stuck with me for the last 20 plus years, the Green Hornet and Kato. You got to include Kato in the list as well.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there. Just listen to that episode in your swamp on that one, where you talk about how much you love the character, and it's pretty clear. My number 2, I think you actually disagreed that it even should belong on my list, and that's actually Doctor Who. Doctor Who is clearly a superhero. If you have any argument as he isn't why, I want to hear it. Otherwise, let's move on, because he deserves to be number 2.
Yeah, well, we'll just move on. I don't really want to get into a Doctor Who argument again.
Okay.
Happens on a regular basis over here, but got to go with my number 1, and everybody who knows me should know what my number 1 is, and that's going to be Kal-El, Clark Kent, Superman. This is the ultimate superhero. This is the one that got me crazy about superheroes. The one that I still identify with. I love his stories. I love the character. Love everything about him. Superman, hands down, best superhero of all time, and my favorite superhero of all time.
Well, I can't agree with you clearly on that, but my number 1 is actually kind of in a similar vein. I picked Captain America as my number 1, who's kind of Marvel's answer in a way to, even though I think he's been around almost as long as what year was Superman?
Superman was
like
1938.
38. So he was about 3 years later when he came out, and he's kind of a different version. And his character is very much a human character, but it's all based around his morals. What right is right and wrong is wrong, and you follow the rules and do what's right. And that's what I think. I think even though we had very different lists, our number 1 characters both represent what a good superhero should be, exactly what the embodiment of a perfect superhero should be. Somebody who is out there for the betterment of all human beings, not just one selective group, and dispenses justice fairly.
Alrighty, so that's going to be our top 5 superheroes. Join us next week where we welcome Sarah Plain and Tall to the show. We'll be discussing the wonderful wizarding world of Harry Potter. Check us out then. See ya.
Peace out, suckers.
Go away or I shall taunt you a second time!